You may have seen different artists online turn animal or monster characters into humans. In this video, I'm going to show you how to do the same thing by explaining how I turned these two characters into these illustrations. These are Creativity Crew's two main characters, sisters Tan and Chan. I wanted to make these two characters and turn them from mice into humans. If you want to do something similar, here's how I did it and how you can do it in your own illustrations. Like everything, the first thing I did was start off with a sketch. It may be difficult to figure out how you want to start coming up with designs for characters that are nowhere near human and turn them into humans. Here are some tips that may be able to help you. Look at your characters and point out some notable features that they have. Even animal characters can have notable characteristics. For example, here's Tan. Because these characters are supposed to be food, she has whipped cream on the top of her head. Maybe there's a way that I could implement this into a human character. Chan here also has a collar. How could I add this to the human version of Chan? Let's find out. So here are the initial sketches that I worked with, and we'll start with Tan's. So as you can see, because the characters are mice, I wanted to give them something similar to large ears like mice have. And I debated between giving them actual mouse ears and making them sort of human-animal hybrids, or giving them a particular hairstyle that resembled ears. And I decided to go with the latter, and I decided to give them both large hair buns. So remember the whipped cream that we talked about that Tan has? I decided to have that coincide with her hairstyle by giving her some little edges right here at the top of her hair that look like wisps, similar to the whipped cream at the top of her head. And what about that collar that Chan had before? Well, I decided to make it into a scarf, so she still has something around her neck, similar to the original design of Chan. These are some very simple ways that you can transfer some elements of your original character's design in their monster or animal form into the human version. So given that these two characters are mice, big teeth were a necessity, so I decided to make sure that both characters had those as part of their design elements. I also wanted to make sure that the two characters were different enough from each other that they stood out, so I decided to make sure that there were some considerable differences. For example, if you look at Chan and Tan, you'll notice that they have different eyebrows. Chan's eyebrows are a little bit thinner and longer, while Chan's eyebrows are a little bit thicker and much shorter. I also wanted to give them similar outfits, but not outfits that were exactly the same, so I took some liberties in coming up with the colors. Speaking of the colors, when it came to them, I actually ended up reversing the color of the characters' hair and the outfits between both of them. So what I mean by that is if you look at Tan here, the colors that I decided to go with for her ended up being pink and blue for her outfit to match the pink and blue of Chan's hair, and the yellow and purple that is seen in Chan's outfit ended up being purple and yellow in Tan's hair. I think this was a good idea because if you'll actually look at my original design for Tan, I was actually considering a much darker hair color. This was the first design that I thought of to do for her, but it didn't really seem to suit the otherwise bright and colorful atmosphere, so I thought that the lavender color ended up working out a lot better. Another detail that you will notice is the color of the character's eyes. So Tan originally had pink eyes and Chan originally had blue eyes, so I made sure that both of the human versions of the characters had those elements rectified as well. Additionally, you'll notice that both Tan and Chan in their mouse forms have sprinkles on their ears, again because they're supposed to be donuts, so I decided to give them sprinkles in their concept sketches. Like I said, because these are conceptual, these are not necessarily what they're going to look like in the final, but I did want to give a visual representation of what the entire creative process was like when they had very tiny sprinkles all over their hair. Outside of that, the rest of the details don't particularly relate perfectly to the original designs, and now we can just sort of design the characters more or less in a way that you want to give them some uniqueness and originality to them. For example, when it came to Tan, I decided to give her some blonde streaks all about her hair, just to give her, it's just something a little bit unique and different, something that Chan doesn't have. I didn't want them to look exactly the same in that regard. They do both have gradient hairs though, and I did want them to have different hairstyles. I wanted them to have different bangs. So as you can see, Chan has more of a blunt cut for her bangs, while Tan has more looser bangs, and a little bit more of a messy hairstyle. And of course, I decided to give them both nail polish so they could look a little bit more feminine. When it came to the skin colors, I decided to just make them very similar to the original designs of Tan and Chan, with Tan being a little bit lighter and Chan being a little bit darker. After that, I worked on designing outfits for the two characters. I decided that I wanted Tan and Chan to both have very fluffy, very sort of, again, feminine and girly vibes to them. So I gave them both a little bit of a thick, puffy jacket for them to wear. And you can sort of see a little bit of Tan's skirt in her illustration, but you can't really see Chan's. But we will talk about that in another video where I talk about how I came up with the fuller body illustrations for both characters. Another detail that I wanted to have for both characters were different eyes. So as you can see, Chan's eyes are a little bit rounder and Tan's eyes are a little bit sharper. This is sort of how I differentiate the characters. I like for Tan's details to be a little bit sharper to give her a more energetic vibe, and a more demure vibe for Chan, so she has rounder features. With that, those are the general notes that I thought of when designing the characters. So this was the final result of the designing process. And from here on out, we will just be talking about how I actually colored both of these illustrations and turned them from these concepts and tests to these finalized versions of them. So when the drawing process started, the first thing I did was I went in and I had to start sketching out over the details on top of the original sketch to make our final line art. I started out with Tan and go back and forth between Tan and Chan, but I work a little bit all over the place, so don't be surprised if you see me jumping back and forth between both characters. I quickly do the face, eyes, hair, and then work on the clothing. I use an asset to draw the hands because I'm not very good at them. If you use Clip Studio Paint, there is an asset store where you can download a bunch of different hands and other features that are a little bit difficult for you to draw. And it makes the whole job a lot easier for you, so I definitely recommend taking advantage of those whenever possible. After finishing up Tan, I move over to Chan and I start working on her details, starting with the face, then moving right on into the hair. Like I said, I wanted to give them different hairstyles, so I was doing a little bit of this freehand and changing up ideas as I went along. You'll see that originally I had a more puffy scarf designed in mind for Chan, but I ended up just turning it into a normal scarf. And moving on from there, I wanted to give them both cheek hearts so that they would have a little bit of a more youthful element to them. You just go in and clean up details with the clothes, the hair. So from here is where I started doing the practice coloring, and I just wanted to test out what colors I was going to use for the final. So as you can see, when I started out with Tan, her hair was a lot darker than originally intended. But after I did Chan's colors and I liked how they turned out, I decided to adjust Tan's. So working on Chan, you can see I gave her a pink hair with a blue gradient, yellow and purple, and then a darker pink color for the scarf. And so because of that, I decided to alter Tan's hair color to be that nice lavender color, and I think it works out a lot better. So now we're just going in and adding in the details of the base color, which is where you start all of your illustrations. You want to start with a base color and then you just render on top of that. So here I am starting to add the rendering. I started out with the face since the face is the main detail here, and I just start adding in some shadows and some lighter areas as well. So here I'm adding in shadows, and when the skin gets lighter, it's the light, which is meant to reflect the light source in your illustration. For a simple portrait like this, there's not really usually a light source, and it doesn't particularly matter how you choose to do it. But I just wanted to make sure that it adds some depth to the skin. While working on the eyes, there is a YouTube video that I tend to follow every single time as a tutorial so that I can make my eyes the same every time. You don't have to do this. You really can take any elements that you like from any tutorials you see, or just figure out your own style for how you choose the eyes. But this tends to work out very well for me, so I decided to use it here, and I will link the video that I use as a reference in the description if you would like to use the same one. After that, we move on to the details of the hair. I start out with some very basic rendering. One of the easiest ways that you can make hair look thick is a strategy that I employ is to just add in some darker shadows at the top and bottom of any aspect of the hair that you're working on. So if you're working on the bangs, the top and the bottom of the bangs, the hair buns, you can see I'm really focusing mostly on the top and the bottom and leaving the middle sort of empty. I add some hard lines with the G-Pen. The G-Pen is the general basic brush that comes with Clip Studio Paint, but it's not the main brush that I use for coloring. I use watercolors. I use many different watercolor brushes. It's really not important which one you choose to use. Just make sure that if you prefer to use a more softer brush, then you want to try your watercolor. But if you want a hard edge for your lines like I've done in the hair, you'll want to use something like your G-Pen. Now we're going into rendering the clothes, and I'm not an expert at rendering clothes. You'll see that I make a lot of changes over to that sleeve on your left-hand side because I didn't really like how it turned out at first. It looked a little bit too wrinkled, like more wrinkled than you would expect a sleeve like that to look. So I ended up adjusting that, and I think it came out a lot better. I like doing highlights in like a very contrasting color, so I use a bright green personally, inspired by an artist that I follow on Twitter, which I will also link in the description. After that, and adding in some stray hairs and sprinkles, tan is basically done. So we're more or less going to use the exact same process when it comes to tan. I ended up starting with the shoulders for her first. It really doesn't matter what order you choose to color things. Whatever works for you is fine. I tend to not start with the face, so I think that's probably why I didn't start with the face here. I usually save it for last. And then the same as before, we move right on into the eyes, following the same process that we did before. I like adding some blush to the cheeks as well to give some warmth to the character's skin. I generally follow the same tutorial as before. I like to use complementary colors, so you'll see that there's a little bit of an orange highlight at the very top of the eye for Chan, and for Tan it was a bit of a blue color. I started rendering the scarf first here because I was using a pretty good reference and I thought that it would make the job a lot quicker, and it ended up working out that way. A trick that I like to use for yellow specifically, instead of rendering with a darker yellow color, I actually tend to use orange or dark red. It makes the yellow pop out a whole lot better than just using darker shades of yellow in my experience, so I highly recommend trying it out if you haven't done so before. You'll see here again, it takes a little bit of time when working on the folds. I'm not great with rendering out clothes, but a tip and strategy that I use is to just use a lot of triangle shapes when coming up with the different folds. Usually you can use a reference as well, and I used a few different ones, both illustrations and real life examples. You'll see that I actually did the clothes before I did the hair because I was a little bit intimidated by doing straight long hair for Chan, but I ended up making it work. So again, you'll see that I added in some hard lines with the G-Pen, and everything else I'm using the watercolor brush for. I have to use, of course, two different colors for the rendering of the shadows. I try to use a dark blue color or an almost purple-like color when rendering the blue parts, and a darker pink for the pink areas. Because everything looks so harsh, I ended up coloring over the lines with the same color that I was using for the hair. So in the blue aspects, I went over and airbrushed the blue color with a blue airbrush, and I went over the pink areas with pink. After that, I add in some finishing touches, some adjustments, color correction, and just adding some more saturation to the illustration. I also like to add stray hair so it makes the hair look a little bit more lively, not like it's just stuck in a single location. I highly recommend doing this. What I would recommend doing is to create an entirely different layer and do your hair strands on that layer, just in case you want to add some specific adjustments that you don't want to mess up on the rest of the hair. So I highly recommend doing some both behind the hair and on top of it. From this point on, we are almost complete, but something that I personally like to do because I really enjoy a very saturated color is that I will take both of the illustrations. I tend to bring them into Photoshop, increase the saturation by 30, and export it out. And that's going to be the finalized designs for Tan and Chan, and turning them into human characters. So what do you think? Do you think they came out well? Do you like the designs? Are you interested in doing the same thing for yourself? If so, make sure you give this video a watch when coming up with the designs for your new characters. I hope that this video was helpful to you and provided you some tips while working on turning your own characters into humans. Thanks for watching.